Okay, good afternoon. First, thanks to the organizers for inviting me to chair this session, and second, for organizing this session. It happens that yesterday afternoon I was closing also a workshop from the National Institute of Aging in Boston, and during 2 days we dedicated a number of sessions dedicated to the elephant in the room. Because yes, we hear about cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, cognition. But behind all that is aging, because aging is the major risk factor for all these diseases that we are talking about. So hopefully in a few months you will be able to read the proceedings of this workshop. It was very interesting. We'll touch from alpha to omega in relation to precision nutrition and healthy aging, and the conclusion is clear, is that we need, when it comes to nutrition, we need more precision in the recommendations. Also, there is a big gap between the research and the clinical application. And the other conclusion was that we have to make every effort to bring this to everybody, not just to the wealthy that can afford to spend a few thousand euros or even more on having these fancy tests that so far they don't say much, honestly. So those were the major conclusions. Another conclusion is that, in terms of gaps, is that obviously, yes, we are having short-term efforts to define some outcomes related to aging, but we need better biomarkers, and we need long-term studies such as PREDIMED, longitudinal studies that are really able to follow two events, which in this case, you know what events means. So that was our major conclusion. So here, that's why I say I'm very happy that the organizers decided to also bring both of you to tell us something that will go most probably along the lines of what was defined. So first we have Professor Ligia Dominguez, MD. She was born in Colombia, and she studied in Colombia, in Universidad de Rosario, in Bogotá. And then she moved north to Wayne State University in Detroit, where she carried basic research and did specialization in endocrinology. Apparently, Detroit was not the best environment, so she moved to a better environment, Mediterranean, to Italy, and she continued her clinical research interest, but probably having more fun. So, the area of concentration, diabetes and its complications, nutrition, of course, bone, mineral metabolism, relation to aging. Okay. All right. And then now you are a full professor of internal medicine and geriatrics at the Core University of Enna, Italy, where she teaches, and I don't know how many universities, and on top of that, she has time to publish over 300 publications in the area. So we are here to listen to you, not to me. So please,
okay.
You have the microphone.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Professor Ordovás. Thank you so much, first and all, for the invitation, in particular to Professor Estefania Toledo, to Professor Martinez Gonzalez. I would like to, here, okay. for the very, very nice and pleasure and pleasant invitation that you have, and an honor of being in this international meeting of olive oil. As Professor Dovaz said, I was not born in the Mediterranean. I was born in Colombia, but fortunately somebody took me to this to this part of the planet, and I have been really discovering not only Mediterranean diet as it is described theoretically, but really practically. And I was involved in all this culture. I was practically immersed in all this culture around the olive oil and the culture of olives. So I'm very happy to speak here today. I called my conference as 100 Years of Health, because I'm from Colombia, and of course, thinking about the 100 years of solitude. They don't have to be like that. They have to be really as plenty as we can. So I will start just saying something that was mentioned by Dr. Franco this morning, Professor Franco this morning, which is the aging of the population. It's undeniable that this is the most impressive demographic event that has happened to the humanity. In 2015, there were 12.3% of humans that were over 60, that will become 16.5 in 30, and that will become 21.5 prospectively in 2015. This happens all over the world. In all the places there are this increase in longevity. He mentioned that the problem is that the highest and the most the highest number of older people will be in less developed countries, so poor countries, and this becomes a very, very important social problem. We have the extreme in Japan. We have the extreme in Japan with over 30% of the population of more than 60, and the extreme in Africa with less than 10%. Very variable, but everybody is increasing the population of aging. But aging is a very heterogeneous condition. Everyone has his or her own aging, depending on what? Depending on how we behave during the whole life, creating this damage that is accumulating, and that we don't feel being an adult or being a young person, and that we become old. We have to pay the check of all this, what happens. In fact, it's a heterogeneous condition, the aging, and we would like to have a successful aging, such as Valentin Fuster or Sophia Loren, but there are many other people that are not famous and that have a very, very successful aging. In the middle, we have usual aging. We have here this successful aging, usual aging, and in the other extreme, something that nobody wants, which is pathologic aging. And we see it in our patients in the long-term facilities with many pathological conditions, very disabled. But we have a condition that is previous to this pathologic catastrophic disability, which is called frailty. And we will talk about more about frailty. This is a video, a very brutal video, trying to convince adult people, adult and young people, how could end up if they don't behave well in terms of nutrition and of lifestyle. And we have here someone that can go for a ride, or someone in the hospital. He goes for a ride in the bike, or living in a long-term facility. These are very brutal videos, but it's very moving, and probably this is made in Canada, in Heart Stroke Foundation. And I think that we have to create a communication that is clear to the public, to let them know that everyone is responsible for his or her own aging, depending on how they behave during their life. Is a topic that concerns everybody, especially the World Health Organization, that is, as Dr. Franco says this morning, is very concerned in these non-communicable diseases, and has created many programs trying to convince and to the promotion of how to delay or avoid these diseases. These are the main diseases, cardiovascular, chronic respiratory diseases, cancer, diabetes, and mental conditions. And we all know that there are many, many risk factors that are modifiable, that are potentially modifiable, and we have to convince more and more people to follow this. The decade between 2020 and 2030 has been dedicated by the World Health Organization to to healthy aging, because aging of the population is very, cost a lot to the health systems, and they can become unsustainable. In 2013, Carlos López-Otín described putting together all the biogerontological science published up to that time in basic sciences, put together all these hallmarks or mechanisms potentially mediating aging, and you see here these nine different cellular mechanisms that can explain why do we age. 10 years after, 2023, there's a lot of research coming out and accumulated, and they put added some other of these hallmarks, including inflammation. Inflammation not only as a hallmark, but as a mediator of many of the other hallmarks. Inflammation is this defense reaction that we all know, but is a defense reaction that is needed to heal the damaged tissue. And in 2000, Claudio Franceschi, a professor from Italy, coined the term inflammaging, referring to this low-grade chronic inflammation that is associated to many diseases and that probably is detrimental for longevity. In fact, inflammaging, in all this year, much research has confirmed what Claudio Franceschi said, that inflammaging is at the base of many of these diseases. And that we thought, many years ago, that they were not related, they were very different, that they had different pathophysiologies. In reality, they have this inflammaging in the background. And this goes to a multimorbidity, the presence of these diseases simultaneously, and they can finish making a person becoming frail, and we will talk about it, and then physical disability, physical disabled, and the most fearful condition, disability in cognitive performance. This is the first study in 2005 that put the relationship between something in olive oil, in extra virgin olive oil, and anti-inflammatory actions. And this was published in Nature by Gary Bechamp. Gary Bechamp, who is an expert in identifying molecules responsible for a taste or a smell, and he found, by serendipity, as always happens with these findings, by serendipity, he went to a meeting in Sicily, by the way, on molecular gastronomy, and he's an expert in tasting different molecules. And it happens that he was studying something about ibuprofen and the irritation in the throat that ibuprofen causes. And when somebody gave him a pure extra virgin olive oil to taste, he felt this same irritation and thought, oh my goodness, there's something here very similar. Ibuprofen or anti-inflammatory drug, and I felt the same exactly irritation. And it took him 5 years, and his lab, of course, 5 years to identify the molecule responsible for the irritation, and he called it oleocanthal. Oleocanthal, actually, in the laboratory, showed to be an inhibitor of COX-1 and COX-2, especially COX-2, an inflammatory pathway in the synthesis of prostaglandins. This is the oleocanthal concentration as it increases. in relation to the irritation, the throat irritation. And you see here many of these oils that he analyzed, some with more or less oleocanthal, and was exactly associated with the irritation. But time goes by, and now we have seen accumulated many studies, not only showing COX-2 inhibition, but also all these pathways of inflammation. So confirming that this molecule, oleocanthal, is real, it has a potent anti-inflammatory activity and also has a potent antioxidant activity in many of these pathways, intracellular pathways, and this I just put in red all the molecules that have been studied profoundly in these studies and have confirmed that oleocanthal is a very potent anti-inflammatory molecule, one of the phenols contained in extra virgin olive oil. But extra virgin olive oil is not only oleocanthal, it's very complex. This is the composition, a summary of the composition of the components that we know about extra virgin olive oil. One is oleic acid, and all the benefits were attributed firstly to the content of this monounsaturated fatty acid, but we now know that much of the minor components, these phenols, which are very variable from oil to oil, are responsible for all of these benefits in antioxidant and anti-inflammatory actions. These are some of the families of the phenols. The most here is the oleocanthal, just one of them. And there are some others that have been really very much studied, like oleopurine, lignans, and hydroxytyrosol and tyrosol, that we will listen an expert, a great expert, the greatest expert in these topics, which is Professor Francesco Visioli. They are simple compounds like tyrosol or hydroxytyrosol, or very complex compounds. This particular family lignans are similar to some of the drugs that you use as anti-cancer, which are the selective estrogen receptor modulators that we use in the treatment and prevention of cancer, and of course, and also in fragility factors. Very complex as they are, and very variable. These are 25 cultivars in Sicily, in just one region, and you see how variable is the content of the polyphenols. It depends on the cultivar, but it depends also, as you know, you many know here, I know that there are people that are expert in these processes. It depends on the transport of the olives and the temperature of at the moment of the press, and many other determinants. This definitely has to do with the difference in organoleptic characteristics, but also in nutrition and health characteristics that we have with these different kinds of oils. This is another of the reviews, another review showing that all the hallmarks, these first 9 hallmarks of aging, there are studies putting together the possible protection and promotion of healthy aging with olive consumption and with health and with aging. But these are studies in basic science, in experimental models, in cells. What about if we go to the humans, to the clinical studies? And this study has been mentioned in 2 of the conferences this morning because it's a really excellent study. It was referred first as the lowering of the cardiovascular mortality risk with just more than 7 grams a day of olive oil. That means half a tablespoon of olive oil is associated with not only cardiovascular disease mortality reduction, but also lowering cancer mortality, 17%, 21% in neurodegenerative disease mortality risk, and 18% in respiratory disease mortality, compared to those who never consume olive oil. And the most interesting part, as shown by Professor Martinez, is that when they did a substitution analysis of olive oil for margarine, butter, mayonnaise, and dairy fats, all was really clear that there's an advantage, a huge advantage of using this olive oil instead of these other fats. not only in cardiovascular mortality, but also cancer mortality, neurodegenerative disease mortality, and respiratory disease mortality. And if we talk about frailty, this condition, this gigantic syndrome, geriatric giant, we call it, because it's really a condition that puts a person in a very vulnerable condition and has possibility of many negative outcomes, such as falls, fractures, repeated hospitalizations, and finishing in a long-term care facility. This very preventable also condition, we had the chance to study it in the data from the senior study, from the Seniors Enrica study of the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, with this wonderful group that we have here, and was published in 2022 in Aging, a very well-known journal in aging. And these were the results. The total oil consumption, as the total oil consumption increased, the risk for frailty decreased. Absolutely remarkable results. For each 3 spoons, just 3 spoons a day of consumption, the risk of frailty was half. This, of course, puts olive oil as a preference in the culinary choices for frailty prevention. And it puts also something that is very difficult in geriatrics for the prevention of frailty, but of course is an element that very cost effectively can contribute to the prevention of frailty. Again, this wide outcome systematic review and meta-analysis that was mentioned already by Professor Martinez showed that, yes, the cardiovascular mortality is decreased, but not only, but also the cancer incidence and mortality decreases significantly, and the diabetes incidence decreases significantly. And now I will call about this, which is one of the fiercest conditions, the fearful condition, not only for the public, of course, but also for the health systems, because it's a very disabled condition that costs a lot and that is in the rise. This is a study that we have the opportunity in a collaboration with the University of St. Louis some years ago. This is from 2012. They had this model of experimental model of Alzheimer's disease, which is a mouse called SAMP8, and we did the feeding of these mice with extra virgin olive oil compared with butter and compared with coconut oil. And these are the regular laboratory tools, instruments that are usual for testing the performance in the mice, in this type of mice. We also measured many of the parameters of oxidative stress, including enzymes and including the quantification of glutathione, of MDA, et cetera. What did we see? We saw that in comparison to butter and coconut, extra virgin olive oil in these animals that were fed all the life. One of the test is directed to the learning ability. Coconut oil and Evo in this type of laboratory test were similar, but not in the retention, the memory. The memory was practically only significant for Evo and also for object recognition, which is also a type of test looking at memory. And the most amazing thing is that we did also preparation of increasing doses of polyphenols, adding some polyphenols in 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, and the dose response was absolutely significant, you see here, in all the tests. Measuring the activity of the glutathione levels and also the activity of some enzymes involved in the generation, in the protection of oxidative stress, or markers of oxidative stress were definitely increased as far as we increased the polyphenol content of the oil. So we concluded that probably in this animal model of Alzheimer's disease, polyphenols of EVO may be involved in enhancing this performance, cognitive performance of this AD model, and that the higher the polyphenols in EVO, the greater the benefits. Very recently, there was this huge review about many preclinical and clinical studies on the relationship between extra virgin olive oil and Alzheimer's disease. And there are many data in preclinical studies, but also there are already 5 completed clinical trials showing that the use of extra virgin olive oil improves the performance of the cognitive performance in different populations. There are also ongoing trials, at least 3 ongoing trials. And now I will give you something that I found 2 days ago, maybe yesterday. I found yesterday that on May 6th, so 3 days ago, there was the publication of this amazing study, also similar to the other ones that we have already shown. And this was done with analysis of the nurses cohort and the physicians cohort from Harvard University. The question was, is the long-term consumption of olive oil associated with dementia-related death risk? I have to remember that these are people that are not Mediterranean. They are in the United States, so they are not used as we are here to use olive oil. And they introduced the question of using olive oil since 1990, not at the beginning of the trial, but you know that, they introduced it later, maybe because you suggested it. I guess Professor Martinez probably was one of the persons who suggested this, including the olive oil consumption that is in the rise, and that even if it's different, even if lower people use it, but always is used more frequently. And they found in this tremendously large study, putting together these 2 cohorts, followed for 28 years, that half a spoon of olive oil was associated with a decrease of 28% of dementia-related death. This, of course, suggests that represents a potential strategy to reduce the mortality related to dementia. These are the numbers. So half a spoon is very significant in reducing the mortality related to dementia, and every 5 grams are very significantly associated with a decrease in risk. But the most amazing is that when they put together the analysis of how much the people consume olive oil and how much they were adhering to healthy patterns like the Mediterranean diet and the AHEI, another pattern of healthy nutrition, they saw that even those who are at low adherence of Mediterranean diet or AHEI are still, with a high olive oil consumption, they are still protected. This protection was unrelated to or independent to having a genetic risk like the ApoA epsilon 4 allele, or having a related risk to cardiovascular disease, hypercholesterolemia, hypertension. Was really independent. Also, replacing olive oil by margarine or mayonnaise was absolutely significant in reducing the risk related to dementia when all the numbers were put in together or when the 2 cohorts were analyzed separately. Why can we explain that olive oil can be this good for the brain, for the performance? These are the classical neuropathological features of Alzheimer's disease: amyloid, neurofibrillary tangles, neurofibrillation, and leakage of the blood-brain barrier. And we can think that the neuroprotective effects of EVO has to do with neuroinflammation. Inflammation goes all over the place, also in the neural system. In the neural system, oxidative stress. We saw that is a really potent antioxidant, but also there have been studies, especially preclinical studies, showing that extravirginal olive oil can increase the clearance of amyloid beta, decrease the neuron loss, hyperphosphorylation of tau, which is another of the histopathological marks of Alzheimer's disease, and increase the integrity and function of this blood-brain barrier. And there are a couple of studies, but I just show one of the very, very well-done studies in a small, still a small number of patients. These patients have MCI, and they compare refined olive oil with extra virgin olive oil, 30 ml per day of refined olive oil versus 30 ml per day of EVO for 6 months, and they measured also the performance, the cognitive performance, and what they found was that the performance, the cognitive performance and the scores of behavioral scores were better with both of these types of oils, but only EVO enhanced brain connectivity and reduced the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. This was done with very sophisticated methods, imaging methods, and functional MRI. But we have to remember that olive oil is not alone, that olive oil really is together with all the other components, wonderful components of the Mediterranean diet. I heard something from Antonia Trigopoulos that is very true, I think is very true, that olive oil makes easier to eat more vegetables, and vegetables makes more easy to use more olive oil, which is perfect. It's a perfect combination of the use, because there are so many other components that with antioxidant actions, with anti-inflammatory actions, with source of good protein, sources of vitamins, of minerals, and of course the non-nutritional part of Mediterranean lifestyle, the regular moderate activity, and of course eating together and preparing meals together. So we have to go from changing the conversation really from a chronic disease, to chronic health, because it's not sustainable. If we have here the capacity of healthcare system, this capacity will be overwhelmed if all these aging populations are going to become old, to become really pathological or associated with all these multimorbidity that I just saw. And I will. These are good numbers. These are numbers that are encouraging, because from the International Olive Council, the increasing consumption all over the world from 1990 to 21, and you see that it continues. This is a per year change, so these are very good news. We have to produce, and we have to fill the gap of the production and consumption, because it's increasing. And my conclusions are here. There's cumulative results, either in animal models and in humans and in epidemiological studies, that EVO produces a series of health benefits and many related to aging. That is not only a monounsaturated fatty acid, this is not only an oil rich in monounsaturated fatty acids, but also have these bioactive compounds that explain the good benefits, the repeatedly confirmed benefits of olive oil. The effects, of course, have to do most probably with the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties of its components. And in perspective, of course, it's accepted that promoting the healthy diet and lifestyle can bring great benefits, and the use and the diffusion of the use of EVO can represent a promising and feasible way of preventing these non-communicable diseases, and thanks to these potent antioxidant and anti-inflammatory actions. And this is the very last slide of my presentation. She's Jean Comment from Arles, and she's the human being that have lived the longest. She lived to be 122. No one has reached that age until now. And when she was 21, was asked, as all these old people, what was the secret of her longevity? And she said, it's my calm disposition, and because I use a lot of olive oil, which I poured in each meal and rubbed into the skin. So, and I have to tell you that this is a picture when Jean Calment was 105. And look at the skin, 105. So, dear Stefania, from tomorrow, we start the treatment with olive oil. Okay, thank you so much for your attention.
Probably we should leave the questions. Thank you. Probably we should leave the questions for the end of the session. And now we have full professor in the Department of Preventive Medicine and Public Health at the University Autónoma of Madrid. Her area of investigation is the prevention of unhealthy aging through diet and lifestyle, using as a tool the epidemiology. And her work has helped to characterize dietary exposures to deterioro of physical function, auditive loss, risk of falls, fragility, and multimorbidity. I think we should talk about all this after and see if you can do something for me. In addition, she is trying to understand the biological mechanisms subjacent, in particular the metabolomic profiles that explains these associations. This work has been carried out in cohorts in Spain, US, and United Kingdom. All yours. The microphone is all yours.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much to the organizing committee for their kind invitation to present our work in this conference. Well, as previous speakers have already shown, aging now is the most important demographic phenomenon worldwide, because for many reasons. In particular, I will notice the improvement in public health and medicine, and also economic and social development. Projections in industrialized countries indicate that life expectancy will continue to increase in the next decades, breaking the 90-year-old barrier in women. In Spain, in particular, those aged 80 and older are growing especially faster, and is expected to triple in the next 3 decades. Spain is one of the 10 countries in which life expectancy is growing, and the only one in Europe. Therefore, a growing segment of the population is demanding strategies not only to increase their lifespan, but also to increase their health span. Although the focus on prevention has always been on avoiding the development of chronic diseases, it's difficult to reach older ages without developing any chronic disease. On the other hand, advances in medicine have made possible to control successfully many diseases, and quality of life can be optimal even with one or more diagnoses. In this context, I can move. Well, sorry, I cannot. In this context, I cannot see the. Okay. In this context, the definition of healthy aging has changed, and now healthy aging is defined as the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables well-being. We want that people keep their functional ability both physical and cognitive, in both physical and cognitive function, and we want that they are able to success living in the environment. Sorry, I cannot see. Well, I'll try. We now know that aging is not necessarily related to disability. We know that some individuals are able to succeed aging in optimal conditions. So research on aging now is focused on understanding which pathways and which lifestyles are able to keep us healthy in optimal function as long as possible. In our work, we are focused on understanding how diet has an impact on the development of the first indicators of disability, including physical impairment and cognitive impairment, as well as sleep disorders. We are also focused on understanding how lifestyles, and in particular diet, is related to the development of frailty, multimorbidity, or faults, who are all of them situations defined as a complex health state, consequences of multiple underlying factors and alteration in several organ systems. And also we are interested in understanding how diet and other lifestyles influence in patients who are already deteriorated their functions. We think that understanding how lifestyle can prevent disability is key to reduce the use of health and social services, hospitalization, institutionalizations that in the end lead to death in the older population. Focusing on the impact of healthy diet patterns provides a comprehensive view of the effect of overall diet, and in particular, the Mediterranean diet, which, as it has been said, is a traditional plant-based dietary pattern, has shown to reduce the risk of many chronic diseases, so it's worth it to understand its role in the disability process. These are the main scores used in the literature to assess adherence to the Mediterranean diet. Some of these patterns have been developed to assess adherence to the Mediterranean diet in Mediterranean countries, but some of them are able to capture the sense of the Mediterranean diet in non-Mediterranean countries. All of them share, although they are very different, as you say, all of them share the idea that olive oil is the main fat in the diet. There is an abundant consumption of plant-based foods and a low consumption of red and processed meats and also sweets, and wine is included in meals in moderation. In this first study, we estimated the association between adherence to the Mediterranean diet and the risk of developing physical function impairment, assessed through objective measures of function, including tests of agility, mobility, gated speed, or grip strength, in a cohort of Spanish older adults. We performed those analyses using 2 Mediterranean diet scores, and we were not able to observe any associations with the MDS score, the original Greek Mediterranean score, but when we used the MIDAS score, specifically for the Spanish population, we found that those with a higher adherence to this diet had lower risk of developing any of these function impairments. We estimated that a 13 lower risk of developing physical impairment could be avoided if participants increased their adherence to the MIDAS in 2 points. Another endpoint of interest for older adults is optimal sleep. In this work, we focused on the effect of the Mediterranean diet and changes in sleep duration and sleep quality. Participants with the highest adherence to the Mediterranean diet, those in the third tertile in the distribution reported less changes in their sleep duration in a 3-year period. We also observed that they also developed less symptoms of poor sleep quality. About 1/3 of people over 65 years old falls each year. Falls are associated with a wide range of negative consequences for health, not only because many of them result in serious injuries and disability, but also because the post-fall syndrome produces loss of self-confidence and autonomy and social withdrawal. Our results showed that people with higher adherence to the Mediterranean diet were less likely to fall than those with the lowest adherence to this diet. It was not possible to observe differences depending on the severity of the fall. And when we examined individual components of the Mediterranean diet, the results were less strong than when we used the whole pattern, emphasizing the idea that the effect of the Mediterranean diet is synergistic and includes olive oil, but also all the components of this diet. Frailty. Dr. Dominguez has already talked about this, but just to say that frailty is different from physical impairment, since it is an advanced stage in the process of disability. Frailty is a syndrome that reflects a state of increased vulnerability to minor stressors, and components of frailty include a loss of muscle mass associated with a decreased resting metabolic rate, energy expenditure, and then malnutrition. We can measure several symptoms that indicated a situation of frailty, and all those symptoms have been conceptualized in different frailty scores. Some of them are here, and we use those scores to define an endpoint of frailty in population studies. In a cohort study of older participants in Spain, we calculated the change in adherence to the Mediterranean diet in a 3-year, 6 and 9 years period. And what we found is that those who increased their adherence to the Mediterranean diet pattern had lower risk of developing deficits associated with frailty at 6 and 9 years old. We quantified that an improvement in more than 1 point adherence to the MIDAS score was associated with an increase of only 0.29 frailty items in comparison with the average increase in frailty items in the total population, which was 0.74 in a year. In a subsequent step, we examined the same association in the nurses' health study cohort. And although this is an American population, we use the definition of Mediterranean diet appropriate for non-Mediterranean countries. We used a much larger sample size, up to 70,000 participants, using a dynamic cohort design in which women entered the study when they were 60 years old. Dietary information was available several times during the follow-up, so we estimated the cumulative consumption during all the years. Confounders included physical activity, socioeconomic level, as well as medication as an indicator of health of the population. What we found is that an increased adherence to Mediterranean-style diet was associated with less risk of frailty in a dosage-response fashion, and 2 points increase in adherence to this score was associated with a 13% lower risk of frailty in a 22 years of follow-up. When we compared the decrease in risk associated with other healthy diets, we found that the greatest risk reduction was observed with those with the Mediterranean diet in comparison with the DASH or the AHEI diet, which are also healthy and plant-based. And this better effect of the Mediterranean diet was also seen when we examined the individual components of the frailty index: fatigue, reduced resistance, salivary capacity, and weight loss. In the same cohort, we assessed the effect of the Mediterranean diet in participants with type 2 diabetes, since diabetes is a main risk factor of frailty because of its detrimental effect on muscle function. This effect is similar to the effect produced by aging. And this is explained because insulin resistance alters energy production and contraction capacity of muscle tissues, and also reduces protein synthesis and increases muscle wasting. We found that a 2-point increase in adherence to the Mediterranean-style diet score was associated with 15% risk reduction in women with diabetes. We have performed analysis for the effect of individual foods included in the Mediterranean diet patterns in association with frailty, and for this conference, I'm presenting the results for fats. What we see in this table is that unsaturated fat, in particular monounsaturated fat, was associated with a reduced risk of frailty, again in a doses-response fashion. We estimated that the substitution of monounsaturated fat for 5% of energy from saturated fat was associated with reduced risk of frailty too. Now, I'm presenting the evidence related to multimorbidity. Multimorbidity is the coexistence of concomitant comorbidities in an individual. Multimorbidity is highly prevalent in the older population. In this graph, we can see the estimation of people with 2 or more chronic diseases among in the Andalusia region, and we can see that the figures are really high for those 66 and 75-year-old. The average number of chronic diseases in this population was as high as 5 in those among 65 years. Although some concomitant conditions are very well known, for example, the metabolic syndrome, other unexpected patterns have emerged in the last years, so we can find concomitant conditions that do not share pathophysiological mechanisms and are really unexpected. So it's interesting to understand whether diet, in particular, is associated with the development of these complex types of multimorbidity. In this study, we examined diet quality in association with the number of chronic conditions and the rate of multimorbidity development among older adults in Spain. We found that high adherence to the MEDAS score was associated with lower number of chronic conditions, and in particular with a lower number of neuropsychiatric and neurodegenerative conditions. In the prospective analysis, using the MEDAS and also the AHEI index score, we found that the rate of chronic disease accumulation along the years was lower among those with a higher adherence to this type of healthy diets. Going deeper to understand this association, we examined in detail nutrient composition in these patterns, and we defined a micronutrient index score with 10 micronutrients that reflected adequate intake of key nutrients for the older adults. This index was highly correlated to the MEDAS score of adherence to the Mediterranean diet. We defined incident multimorbidity as developing 6 or more chronic conditions during the follow-up, and we found that higher adherence to the micronutrient index was associated with lower risk of multimorbidity after adjustment for other lifestyles and socioeconomic factors. And lastly, we know that adopting a healthy diet along with other lifestyle factors can potentially add 8 to 10 years of disease-free life expectancy. So similarly, adhering to several healthy lifestyles can have a synergistic effect preventing outcomes related to aging. We assessed this hypothesis using the Healthy Heart Score, which is a set of the modifiable behavioral factors: smoking, alcohol intake, body mass index, physical activity, and a set of dietary exposures that are part of the Mediterranean diet: high consumption of cereal fiber, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and low consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages and processed meats. We found that those participants in the quintile 4 of the score, meaning less healthy lifestyles, had a very high increased risk of frailty in comparison with those participants in the lowest quintile with much more healthier lifestyles. What next? What we are now focused on the dynamic process of aging. Instead of using each endpoint individually, we want to characterize the effect of dietary patterns using models that take in consideration sequential steps in the disability process. And we also need to include more social aspects, for example, social integration, loneliness, and financial situation, because we believe that this is the focus on lifestyles and diet in particular is important, but we also need to focus on this social aspect to prevent disability. We are also working on new and better definitions of complex multimorbidity, since the number of chronic conditions is poor, and also the known comorbidities is too simple. So we are using electronic medical records in order to combine the information that we can find there to develop more complex indices of multimorbidity. We are examining the impact of plant-based diet on other outcomes than the one shown here, for example, sensorial impairment, which is very relevant for the elderly population. And finally, we need to find better biomarkers of unhealthy aging that are able to characterize the disability process. So that's what we are doing now. And in summary, the Mediterranean diet patterns has been associated with less risk of developing physical impairment, falls, frailty, and sleep disorders. And this suggests that the beneficial effect of this diet happens in different stages of the process of disability. The evidence of the impact of the Mediterranean diet on complex multimorbidities is still scarce, but our results suggest that this diet could be beneficial to prevent this outcome. And finally, the effect of the Mediterranean diet can be enhanced with other healthy lifestyle factors and also social factors in an holistic approach to healthy aging. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you, Lygia, for sticking to the time. Still, we carry some delay from previous sessions, and coming here, I have seen some of our colleagues working very hard on preparing the taste. So we should not spoil that work, and we are only to contemplate maybe one or two burning questions to either Esther or Lygia about what we have been listening from them. Anybody rushes to the microphone? Oh, we have one. We have one.
un vaso de agua con limón, pues 1 cucharada o 2 cucharadas de aceite. Mi abuela lo hacía. ¿Se puede plantear? ¿Se podría? Supongo que todavía no se han hecho estudios en ese ámbito y tal. Vamos corriendo, muchas veces a lo mejor logramos, te estoy hablando tanto a nivel profesional como a nivel personal, ¿no? Que nos facilitan mucho el tómate este suplemento por la mañana y ya está, ¿no? Y te sirve para prevenir, como si tienes una enfermedad neurodegenerativa, para prevenirla. No sé, quizás a lo mejor para Ligia.
Después tú hablas también.
Que había hablado.
Creo que podemos decir algo las dos.
No sé, me lo he planteado así porque, bueno, creo que ya se venden suplementos vinculados de pastillitas de aceite de oliva y tal.
Pues haces una pregunta muy importante y muy difusa en nuestro ambiente, porque toda esta acumulación de resultados benéficos nos hacen pensar que una pildorita que tuviera todo lo que tiene estas maravillas del aceite de olivas fuera una píldora mágica, que no tenemos que hacer nada más sino solamente tomarnos la pildorita. Incluso las 2 cucharitas de aceite a la mañana, o incluso cosas que son, pues, realmente podrían hacer muy poco si fuera una sola, porque el proceso de envejecimiento es tan complejo y tan lleno de diferentes determinantes que es difícil que haciendo uno solo vayamos a cambiar todo. Es cierto que la gente, por ejemplo, que utiliza más aceite de oliva también adhiere a otros componentes importantes del estilo de vida mediterránea. No lo digo dieta solo, sino dieta en el sentido completo. Entonces seguramente no ayudará una sola cosa. Con los suplementos seguramente no es lo mismo, porque son químicos, tratan de hacer la oleuropeína y tratan de hacer el oleocantal y tratan de hacer tantos extractos de resveratrol o del vino y bueno, de tantos extractos, pero ninguno ha probado que los suplementos realmente sean útiles. Son útiles para hacer dinero, muy útiles, porque... solo las cucharitas. Bueno, porque ese capítulo de los suplementos químicos, digamos, eso está muy claro que no hacen nada, que hacen muy buen dinero, hacen mucho para los que lo venden, porque son muy proficuos, pero no, en realidad no hacen nada. En cuanto a los 2 cucharitas de la mañana, yo creo que es una buena costumbre, pero que tenemos que hacer algo más que solo las 2 cucharitas. Cierto que el mundo de hoy es tan agitado y que no tenemos tiempo, pero en realidad es cuestión de organizarse. Yo creo que uno, pensando a las prioridades que tiene la salud, que tiene el protegerse, no solo para nosotros mismos, sino para las familias, para los hijos, y en el caso que seamos también médicos, operadores sanitarios, en el ejemplo que damos y en el mensaje que pasamos a la gente, que se difunde siempre más que el estilo de vida con todas sus componentes es importante para prevenir y para favorecer un envejecimiento sano y prevenir todas estas enfermedades que cuestan tanto y que llegarán a ser insostenibles en no muchos años, dentro de no muchos años.
Well, then I think it's time now to have that
Taste.
a scoop of olive oil. It's not in the mornings, at midday, but let's see if it has some effect. Okay?
We should have a couple of spoons in the morning, at midnight, at midday, and at night, but together with all the other components.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Both of you.